Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture. Brought to you by Dallas Theological Seminary.
Welcome to the Table, where we discuss issues related to God and culture. And our topic today is ministry in Europe, and particularly we'll be talking about Islam and some ministry that takes place from Europe into the Middle East and in Islamic countries. And my guest today is Dwight Ekholm, who has been a part of Crew, is that right? Or
in Trust.
In Trust, okay. But you were with Crusade.
We were with Crusade up until '89.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
So see, I'm going to walk him through all this.
Sure.
So let's start there. What do you do within Trust?
Okay, I've been living in Europe since 1974.
Mm-hmm.
Graduated from seminary here at Dallas in '73. Moved over to Vienna to work behind the Iron Curtain, and then eventually it came down. And so for the last 13 years, been living in Athens, Greece, and I primarily involved in leadership training among former Muslims from the Middle East. There are a lot of refugees who've come through Athens. Greece is kind of a major landing point for people coming from the Middle East, from North Africa, trying to get into Western Europe. And been involved in Bible teaching, discipleship, working with these young believers, and leading like an outreach breakfast to diplomats. So we've had ambassadors and different diplomats from quite a number of countries involved in that. Then I teach once a year at the Greek Bible College, and have started traveling some into the Middle East as well.
We visited when I was on sabbatical in Germany, and I came to Athens and got to attend one of those Bible studies. And a very, very effective ministry, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. Well, let's just dive right in. You've talked about your ministry some in Greece. What exactly you've talked about the Bible studies and the ministry to the diplomats? How exactly does that work?
Okay, I'll back up a little bit historically. When we had first moved to Athens, I got a call from a friend who was working at a refugee center, and he said they've got quite a number of new believers from one particular country in the Middle East, and he knew that I was a Bible teacher, knew I'd gone to Dallas Seminary, and he asked if I'd be willing to come down and teach these guys. So I went down to a place called the ARC, the Athens Refugee Center, and started meeting with a group of 6 guys who were all fairly new believers, and taught them some novel stuff like observation, interpretation, application.
Some basic Bible study.
Basic things that I learned from Howard Hendricks and Harold Honer a while back at Dallas. And, had to make some cultural adaptations and that sort of thing, but just started studying the Bible with these guys, and then we started working through Galatians and the Gospel of John, different books of the Bible. By the time we'd finished the first course, 5 of the 6 guys had gone on to other places. So I was down to one guy named Nadir, and then we had to start all over again. Wow. But so it's a little bit like trying to do something on a revolving door. People are coming and going.
Now, were these guys had they come to Christianity out of Islam, or?
Yeah. They had all been raised as Muslims. Some of them had met the Lord in Istanbul, some in Athens. There's kind of this refugee highway going from the Middle East through Turkey. An awful lot of refugees will get as far as Turkey, and then they'll pay a smuggler to take them across, either up in northern Greece, up across the border from Turkey into Greece, or smugglers will put them on a boat and send them to one of the Greek islands and kind of hop their way across, get to Greece, pay a bribe to some official at the port to let these guys off, and then they usually end up in Athens. And there is a whole network of refugee ministry centers in Athens, run by a number of different organizations, and they're providing some food, some temporary shelter, clothing, and that sort of thing. but they're involved in evangelistic outreach. So like at a place like the ARC, the Athens Refugee Center, they will have feeding several times a week, and they've got big televisions up on the wall showing the Jesus film or something of that nature. They'll have discussion groups. They offer English classes because every refugee in the world wants to learn English because they all want to go to California or to Canada or to Vancouver, Canada. So that's a great calling card to offer English classes. And they have groups for women and children. And basically, my niche in all of this for the last dozen years has just been Bible teaching and trying to mentor some leaders. So we've had, like, there have been classes down at the ARC where we've worked through different books of the Bible. We've offered a thing called the Athens Intensive Ministry School a number of years ago. It was a 6-month intensive class for a group of guys that showed real ministry potential. And we've partnered with probably 3 or 4 of these different refugee organizations over the years. But I just say basically what I am is a blue collar Bible teacher. I teach these guys the scriptures, try to teach them how to teach others. And once we really get rolling with these guys, then they go on to somewhere else.
So they're in Athens, kind of in transit oftentimes, and they could end up anywhere, basically in Europe or
anywhere in the world. And I say that Athens is sort of like a big bus station or a train station where there's all these people waiting to leave, and they're trying to get to Germany or Norway or Switzerland or England, or to the U.S. or Canada. And at any moment, they might just be gone.
The refugee element of this is interesting because the situation that I'm familiar with in Germany is that the German government really invited many people from Middle East, particularly Turkey, to come in and take the jobs that many Germans didn't want to take. And so they enter in legally, and now they have a significant minority, mainly Turkish population. I think France has got a similar situation. And so to hear the smuggling aspect of it is kind of a new twist for me, because most of my contact has been through legal means and through really invitation to come into Europe.
We lived in Germany for 10 years, so I'm familiar with that there were a lot of Turkish, even the word they use in German is Gastarbeiter.
That's
so
right.
They're guest workers. So they came as guests of the German government and were paid a fair wage and provided with medical care and all this sort of thing. And I've seen statistics. There is a large population of Turkish workers that have stayed in Germany. They've learned German. They're raising their kids there. But Athens is much more of a transient situation, and the economy is so bad in Greece that people who had jobs as foreigners have lost their jobs. And it's just kind of this downward spiral of hopelessness. So they're all trying to get out of there.
They're at the bottom of the well, so to speak, of things, and things in Greece are tough. Part of the reason we do these is these broadcasts on issues related to Europe and Islam and that kind of thing is because we want people to think globally about what's going on with Christianity and the issues that are associated with culture in general and Christianity in particular. I really have 2 ways I can go right now in terms of what I'm going to ask you, but I think I'm going to deal with kind of the general secular questions first and then turn to ministry, because I do want to come back and talk about what ministry to people who come out of Islamic background is like. But first, let's talk about the issues that Europe feels as a result of this influx of Islamic presence in a variety of countries. And I'll frame it this way. I remember from my sabbaticals in Germany numerous times having conversations with people in which I said, in effect, Turkey's tried to get into the European Union, and they set up the rules for Turkey to do it, and Turkey, best part I can tell, met those rules and looked like everything was going fairly smoothly. But then, and I don't know if this was just 9/11 or what, but the nervousness that many people in Europe feel about allowing Turkey in, although from a secular structural basis, there really is no reason to exclude Turkey. On the other hand, from a practical standpoint, and from a practical standpoint, if you let Turkey in with all the open border situation that you have, that produces a problem. So explain kind of how Europeans view that particular potential.
Yeah. I think there is kind of a general fear that, like you said, if Turkey gets into the EU, then like they do have open borders, for example, with Iran, and I think several of the other countries that border Turkey. So, I think there is that fear of just, we've got more refugees in Western Europe than we can handle, and if we take Turkey in, it's just going to, exponentially increase the problem. I don't sense that, the average German is so worried about the religious part, but I think they're more concerned maybe about just the economic effect of more and more and more people coming in looking for work, and then having a right to the social system and that sort of thing. I mean, there's a certain amount of fear of Muslim influence, but generally speaking, I think in most of Western Europe, it's so secularized that it's sort of like, it doesn't matter what your religion is.
Religion is having an impact anyway.
Sure, yeah. So unless you want to come in and start, killing people, I don't think they're overly worried.
But is there nervousness about the security aspects of what open borders would mean?
Oh yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think the open borders in the EU have just made it a lot easier for all kinds of people to come and go. And I mean, it makes it easier for us as we travel.
It certainly does. I remember going from Germany to France, or Germany in whatever direction. You had to stop at every border crossing and et cetera. And now you just go, and it's like going from one state to another in the United States. You don't even think about it.
Right. Yeah. You fly in and out, and you don't have to show your passport. You drive across. I mean, when I was doing my doctorate in Basel, I was living in Germany, and every time we passed, we would have to show our passport, and they wanted to know what we had in our suitcase. And,
absolutely.
And for a while, when we lived in Germany in the 80s, we had to have a visa to go across over into France.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely remember those days. Well, it struck me. I remember one particular conversation I had with a German theologian. We were just spending a couple of days together talking about theology, and we got onto this topic, and I had the view that Turkey just had every right in the world to think about coming into the EU. They had met the standards, and they had done what the Union had asked, and there wasn't a religious entrance requirement of any kind. So it seemed like they would get in without a blinking an eye. And he as a German, just walked through all the social, economic, and security issues that caused many people to have pause, so that even though they met these standards, and I think there may have been a time when they offered these standards that they questioned whether or not they would ever be met.
Sure.
And so now there were all these roadblocks coming into the conversation, and I saw his nervousness, and it struck me. It's one of those conversations that you have with someone who lives there, where you go, oh man, I haven't even thought about 3/4 of what they're thinking about and what concerns them, because I'm not that immersed in the culture.
Yeah.
Well, let's transition. Let's talk about ministry. I understand also that not only have you ministered in the context of refugees coming to Athens, but you've also done some ministry in the Middle East. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the connection there was a young believer from the Middle East that who met the Lord in Athens a number of years ago, and I got involved in teaching and mentoring him, and basically just an incredibly gifted young evangelist. I mean, in the space of about a year and a half in Athens, he led over 100 Muslims to Christ.
Oh wow!
And was leading a ministry in Athens, and eventually was able to be invited officially to Canada. Some Canadian people who'd been involved in him coming to Christ, and they sponsored him and invited him to come to Canada. So he moved to Canada several years ago, got Canadian citizenship, and his whole goal was not to stay in Canada and watch hockey games. His goal was to get a passport so that he could travel in the Middle East. So now, 2 years ago, he and his wife moved back to the Middle East. They're in a country not all that far from Greece, and they're settled there doing ministry to their countrymen and in the country where they're living. So I've gone and spent some time with them, and they have a strategy of trying to train leaders for these house churches that exist all over the Middle East. I mean, there's a real revival going on in certain parts of the Middle East, and you've got a lot of young believers who are meeting together. Their leaders have practically no training. So this young guy that we call Matthew, which is sort of his code name, has been involved in writing materials in his language, translating other materials. And he and his wife coordinate some training sessions about every 2 or 3 months. They'll do a 2-week session, and they're bringing in different teachers. We have a colleague who taught Old Testament up at Trinity. We have a colleague who's a pastor of an international church in Budapest. And these guys will go there for a couple of weeks at a time and do some training classes. And so his whole vision is ultimately, as doors open up eventually, would be to have some kind of more of a organized training program in his home country. But right now he's not able to do that. But people can somewhat travel. And so to me it feels like what we're doing there feels a lot like what we used to do behind the Iron Curtain.
Oh, wow.
In one sense, you have to be sort of careful. It's hard to know whom to trust.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people doing things that we really don't know exactly who's who and what they're doing. But there is a lot going on in that part of the world.
I'm curious, who's the Old Testament guy who was at Trinity?
His name is Frans. Let's see, it's a Dutch name. Give me a minute, I'll think.
Well, it's a small world because I actually taught 2 weeks in Jordan, and we overlapped, and so we actually were roommates in the apartment together because we were teaching in Jordan.
Frans den Ekster Blokland.
Yeah,
take a minute to get his name.
There you go. Yeah. We actually taught in Jordan at the Jordan Evangelical Theological Seminary at the same time. How about that? That's a new one. Anyway, so he's got this ministry where he's ministering to the house churches, and you've gone in it to help some of the time?
Yeah, I was there earlier this year and had a chance to speak at one of these home gatherings, and just a delightful group. And he translated for me. Obviously, I don't speak that language. But it was exciting to see, these groups, and there are groups like this all over the country.
Now, when they meet in these house churches, about how large a group are we talking about?
This group was, I would say, around 40 people, so it's a pretty good sized group. And there was a young man there that's leading the group who has about 2 or 3 jobs. He basically pastors this church, and then he's a taxi driver at night and a house painter by day.
Oh, wow.
And a fascinating guy. He had been raised Muslim, and after he became a follower of Jesus, his brothers-in-law came up and basically beat him up, threw him out the window, and took his wife and children away, took them back home. So he's lost his whole family.
Wow.
because of the commitment he's made.
Now, you said that there's a little bit of a revival going on among Muslims. Do you have a sense of what draws them to the gospel?
Well, it's obviously going to vary in different situations.
Right.
But let's say, like in Athens in particular, what I've heard over and over and over again is we arrived here, we didn't have anything, we had nowhere to go, and none of my countrymen came out and said, here, come and stay with us, or we're going to feed you and do that. But it was the Jesus people that said, come, we've got hot soup, or we've got tea, and clothes for your kids, and basically just to see the love of Jesus in some kind of tangible way is usually what attracts people initially. And now, in certain contexts, I suppose people are going to be a little leery of this, but I am hearing of an awful lot of people in the Middle East who are having visions, where they have this vision of Jesus.
Yeah, I've heard several similar stories.
And I was talking with a couple of these church leaders, and they were telling me about a man that they knew who had gone on the Hajj, and while he was there, he had a vision of Jesus, and he came back as a follower of Jesus.
Wow.
So there are, and I mean, there's quite a number of these stories.
Yeah, I've heard many stories like this, and even I've even heard some that are much simpler. We hope, in one of our discussions of Islam, to have a person who ministers in Turkey, who I know, who and his story is what got him curious about the gospel was the movie Ben-Hur.
Okay.
because he saw the crucifixion scene, and in Islam, Jesus doesn't end up really being crucified, so they don't know what to do with his death, and much less his resurrection. And so it got him curious, and so he started to ask anyone who came over from America, he said, or European, he would ask them, a theological question about the crucifixion. He said most of the people that he asked didn't know, know what to tell him, and then finally he met a couple who just gave him their Bible, and he said he went home and read it, and that's how he came to the Lord. So Ben-Hur was the starting point. So so it's amazing what can draw. But I think it's interesting. I don't want to let this point pass. That it's service ministry, if I can say it that way, that draws people, because even in the life of Jesus, you see this juxtaposition between word and deed.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes we get thrown off, I think, because Jesus does ministry with miracles and that kind of thing, and so. But the whole point of the combination of word and deed was that the message had a credibility behind it in terms of the way people were treating other people, that opens up the door for taking the message more seriously, and you're seeing that in the Islamic world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Now. When you minister to people who come out of Islamic background, what are some of the issues that you face, either as they're becoming open to the Christian faith, or on the other end, once they've become believers and they're just starting out?
Yeah. Those are some very good questions. I'm almost drawing a blank because there's a lot of stuff. But let me back up and just think about that just a minute. Just the other day, just before I left Athens, I was doing a Bible study down at a fairly new group that's been started by a young guy that we've been mentoring for years. And there's a very intelligent young man who's about 18 years old. His English is amazing. And we talked afterwards, and he was saying that he couldn't understand why the Bible called people sheep, why we like sheep have gone astray. And somehow that was offensive to him. But obviously the whole idea of Trinity is a real stumbling block to them, and the idea that Jesus could be the Son of God. I think typically a Muslim is thinking, well, did somehow God have a relationship with Mary, and that there's some kind of a physical birth here, that God was the physical Father, and just wrestling with the whole idea of Trinity is
because the conception of God is very different in Islam, isn't it? I mean, it's more a distant God, a God who is extremely sovereign, a God who doesn't enter into relationship. You're just simply to respond to Him. So the idea of a God who makes covenant, and a God who seeks relationship with human beings at a relational level, that really is just a completely worldview shift in many ways, isn't it?
And from a lot of the men that I've talked with, it was just a spirit of fear. I need to be afraid of God and what He's going to do to me. And the idea of God being a God of love and of grace is really revolutionary. I would say that one of the major issues that I've encountered over and over again is once people become believers, they're still very, very suspicious of other people. They don't know what's somebody trying to get from me, and I found that a lot of the guys that I've met who are new believers are still. They want to talk behind the back of somebody else, or they don't trust each other. And there's a lot of divisions. And some of these guys, and I keep working with them to try to learn to function together. But generally, they want to be friends with me, and the other guy wants to be friends with me, but they don't want to be friends together. And, there's obviously exceptions to that, but there is sort of a general suspicion. And I've encountered, too, that guys who get involved in different ministries are suspicious that maybe somehow we're using them to raise money in the West or something like that, taking their pictures and putting it on websites to get people to send in money. So it's sort of like, what are why are you doing this?
So all that suspicion gets in the way of being able to build a genuine community in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And so I would say we've just had to take the time over time to just show, we are committed to you as a brother in Christ. And, we're not just doing this because this is our job. Basically the motto that we've had for our ministry over the years is from 1 Thessalonians 2, that, I didn't just teach you the gospel, but, we shared our lives with you as well. And, the people that we've really, we've gotten to know, they're very, very relational, and they love coming to our apartment to have a meal. They love, inviting us to be with them, just to take time to go out for coffee together or, meet, very, very relational. And, they're very, very loyal.
So if you can get them to turn on the trust, then they really make for good community people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about that's interesting. You've got it's multiple hurdles. You've got the different view of God and being distant versus being close. You've got the hurdle of the Trinity. You've got issues, I think, related to how the Bible is seen. Have you run into that issue in discussing the Christian faith, how Islam views the Bible?
Well, they seem to have a respect for the Bible, and they have a respect for Jesus. And, I find that, we get in and say, this is what the Bible says, okay. And I find particularly these new believers to be really, really serious about wanting to study the Bible. And, they don't come in with all kinds of, theological preconceptions about what things mean. I mean, we just get in there and we start reading and we're looking, what does it say, and try to figure out what does it mean and how do we apply it. And I find them to be really, really good Bible students. And as they start to understand things in context, like I've met quite a number of guys who met the Lord and they started coming to different refugee centers, and they were subjected to all this kind of Bible hopscotch, where the guy's up front, starting out in Galatians, and he jumps over to Ephesians, and then he's ending in Leviticus, and after a while these guys their heads are just spinning. So once I was able to get them into a Bible study and just work through, let's say, Philippians, and just work through from beginning to end, and it's, Brother Dwight, we've never done this before, and can we have another class tomorrow night? And just really, really teachable. And sort of like Blue Bell ice cream. The more you give them, the more they want, and they really recognize the difference.
So, do you have a particular book that you start with?
I would say I've generally started with Galatians. And I've used Philippians a lot. And I found that one book that people can really relate to in that situation is the book of Ruth. We go into the first chapter and we look at Ruth and her family and all this, and they said, now in our context today, what would we call Ruth? She's a refugee.
Oh yeah.
And here's for economic reasons, they left one situation. They're down here. They've had death in the family. Can you guys relate to this situation? And and then I worked through the book of Acts one time with a number of these guys, and we get to chapter 8 and say, well, who was it that spread the gospel? These were refugees. They were getting kicked out of Jerusalem. So, they can understand a lot of the Old Testament culture and relate to it probably a lot better than the typical person in the West can.
Yeah, that's true.
Culture is, their culture is so much more similar than what ours is.
So that's interesting. Now, is there a particular gospel that draws, or? We've offered different gospels, and it does seem that John is one that they really jump on. It's just so different than what they're used to in thinking about who God is.
Yeah, I think so. But like particularly with some of the business people and the diplomats, I've taken things like from Mark and Luke in particular, and just kind of get a hold of one of the parables or one of the situations. We've got a number of people from Lebanon who are involved in that, and they can somehow really connect with these stories. And I would say that the guys from the Middle East do really relate to some kind of a like the gospel where you've got a specific confrontation between Jesus and someone else. They get into that, I would say, more than say Romans or whatever. They're just not accustomed to thinking that way.
We've heard about your ministry, and we've even did a little bit of a sign-off, and then you shared with me some statistics about the Muslim makeup of countries in Europe and surrounding Europe, which I thought were just so fascinating that people ought to hear this, because I don't think they're aware of kind of where we are and where we may be going. So, Dwight, I'll ask you to just read off some of the statistical information you have about the percentage of Muslim population in Europe and in some of the surrounding countries.
Okay. Yeah, I've just been doing some reading online recently and come across, a number of statistics, and obviously people are going to have different projections, but one of them that I read just recently saying that currently about 5% of the population in the European Union identifies themselves as Muslims. And then they said the UN estimates that Europe will be 55% Muslim by the year 2040.
Now, that's because Europeans tend not to have very many children, whereas Muslims do. Is that?
I'd say maybe the average Western European has about 2/3 of a child or something per marriage.
That's interesting. I don't know quite how you do that, but I'll let you figure that out for me.
Well, they can do a lot in Europe.
That's right.
But, so the population in, I think in probably every Western European country of the ethnic people from that country is going down. It's getting smaller and smaller. And of course, the people coming up from the Middle East and North Africa, particularly to places like France, they have a very high birth rate, and you've got more and more people just pouring in.
So you got the combination of immigration and birth.
Right. Yeah. So when I lived in Vienna in the 70s, I didn't see anyone from the Middle East, but now when I'm back in Vienna, there are areas where everyone you see is either from the Middle East or from Pakistan or from North Africa. So there's this migration that is coming there. So, like Germany right now is just under 4%. I was surprised to see that Switzerland is about 4% Muslim. You've got a few of these countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina and Albania that have a much higher percentage. But like France, they're saying is 10% right now, and of course growing at a fairly rapid rate.
And Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, and Albania, how large is the population there, the percentage of
the percentage in Albania is 70% Muslim. And Bosnia and Herzegovina is 40% right now.
So it's quite a range. It can go from a very small minority to a very almost a plurality or something like that.
Yeah. And in Bosnia, it was. Kosovo was almost 90%.
Yeah. Well, of course that would do. Anyone who's familiar with the history there knows what's going on.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting backdrop to put into what's going on and why this kind of ministry that you're engaged in is so potentially important, because there is going to be an increasing presence of Islamic people in Europe, and that certainly is going to impact the international scene in a significant way, and that's worth knowing about. So I'm glad you're willing to come back and give us this little this little postscript,
little footnote,
footnote to our podcast. Thank you, Dwight.
Sure, and I'll just mention too that there are organizations that are working all over Western Europe, ministering to refugees, and there is somewhat of a network of people who are connected together. So, like, let's say somebody meets the Lord in Athens, and we know they're going to Frankfurt. We'll try to find ways to connect them to people who are ministering up there. There's been a thing called the Refugee Highway Partnership, where the goal has been to try to link different organizations like that, and that's functioning to some degree.
That's interesting. So it isn't just in trust. There's a whole.
There's international teams, quite a number of other organizations. Are focusing, and I mean, Entrust is a very small organization, and we just have a really, really small niche. But we we have contacts with friends in a lot of other places. There are just a lot of different organizations that are either run by people from the Middle East or run by Westerners, but who are reaching out to refugees.
Well, again, thank you for coming in, and the information's been, I'm sure, informative, and it pulls back a window on what's going on in a part of the world that oftentimes we don't think about, and it raises the question about what is God doing in the midst of these migratory moves that are changing the makeup of the way we think about the world in certain parts of the world. We want to thank you, Dwight, for coming in and talking with us about what your ministry to Islamic believers, I don't know what other phrase to use, has been like, and the ministry, and we just thank you that you're doing what you're doing, and would pray that your ministry would bear fruit, and that those who you're training will turn out to be able to encourage others to come into the faith. Thank you for coming in with us today.
Thank you.
And we thank you for joining us at the table where God and culture meet, and we hope to see you again next time.
Thanks for listening to the Table Podcast. Dallas Theological Seminary. Teach truth, love well.